today's video I'm really excited because we are going to finally be putting plants into my new immersed aquarium plant setup. Alright, so before we get started, I also wanted to say, because this is the first time that we're putting plants into this system, I know from a little bit of testing that the pattern of water fluctuation in each one of these tiers is all slightly different. You know, for example, the tub here is obviously a lot more deep, and so any plants that we put in there are going to be exposed to a deeper water column, and they're going to be underwater for a longer period of time compared to, you know, any plants that we put in one of these tiers here. And because I'm planning on putting plants in all of these different tiers, I think this gives us a great opportunity to experiment with a few different media selection and seeing what species of plants actually benefit in the different patterns that we see in the different tiers. And so how I'm planning on doing that is I have a selection of a few different growing media, and I'm planning to pot these different plants in different media and placing them in different tiers throughout the system. And then over time we can actually kind of monitor the growth of these plants, you know, and hopefully try to make some sort of determination as to, you know, what is the best media and what is the best ebb and flow pattern that is going to grow our immersed aquarium plants the best. Alright, so let's talk media. For this project I was planning on using 3 different kinds of media, and I thought we would do a little bit of an experiment to see which one grows the plants the best. So the 3 types of substrate that I was planning on using was just regular soil, which I've used a lot in the past in some of the other immersed tubs that I've documented on my channel. I was planning on using just regular gravel. And the third media that I was going to use was a clay pebble, also known as leca, which is a light expanded clay aggregate. Now, I only had one issue when preparing the media for this. You know, most of the gravel and media that you'll buy at the store will need to be pre-washed, and that could take a little bit of time. And so when I was pre-washing my clay pebbles, I had one little issue that came up. So hopefully, as you can see here, all of my clay pebbles are pretty much floating. I did not expect this, but it does make sense because as these clay pebbles are fired and manufactured, they become very porous and they have a lot of air inside of them. But all that basically means is for today's experiment or project, we're going to be just evaluating the differences from, you know, regular gravel and then a mixture of soil and gravel as well. I figure I'm going to still include the gravel in the soil pots just because I want to include a cap, or else once the water level rises I think it'll get a little bit too muddy with the soil, and so I want to try to mitigate that as much as possible by, you know, sandwiching the soil with a layer of gravel on the bottom and gravel on the top. Alright, so I have my materials ready. I've got my gravel here, which is a fairly large size gravel that, you know, I wouldn't normally opt for. I think maybe more of a smaller gravel would be more suitable. However, this is what I had on hand, so I'm going to give it a go and see how it works. For soil, I'm using a pretty standard black earth. There's no enhancements to this, no you know, fertilizer or perlite or any kind of modifications to the soil. And this is my preferred soil for more traditional immersed setups where you would just place the soil in a tub and set that in a windowsill or with some artificial lighting. So I have used this a lot in the past and it grows plants really well. Alright, so starting off with the soil tubs that I plan on using, I mentioned that I wanted to sandwich the soil with a cap of gravel on the top and on the bottom. So the reason for this is as the water level's rising and falling, you're going to have water coming up through the bottom, but then as well it's going to overtop the container, and so I want a cap on the top as well in order to prevent soil from floating up and out of the containers. Okay, and next I'm going to add a little bit of soil. Now, I'm a big proponent of using soils both in immersed setups as well as aquariums, but when doing so it is really important to remember that a little bit goes a really long way. So for this I am only going to use a very small layer of soil. The soil is going to be jam-packed with nutrients to begin with, so I don't need a lot of soil in order for this to kickstart our plants. But also with an ebb and flow system, the majority of the nutrients that I want to be feeding our plants is going to be in the water column. So I'm not planning on relying on the nutrients from the soil alone. So with that said, I think only a small covering of soil is going to be all that we need. Another thing too is as the water is rising and falling through this tub, soil does have a tendency to get a little bit more compact compared to the gravel. And so we do want to have a small amount of soil in there in order to allow the water to fluctuate within the tub. If we have too much soil and it becomes too compact, we might not have that rising and falling of water level in the tub that we're looking for. All right, so there we have it. The soil tub is complete. I'm going to make a few more of these. And as for the gravel tubs, those are pretty straightforward. It's just going to be nothing but gravel. All right, so now that we have the containers ready to go, I think it's time that we start propagating and transplanting some of the aquarium plants that we have here. So as you can see, I have two immersed tubs that I've been growing for quite a while. They are getting quite overrun. So I think it is about time that we start going through here, propagate what we can, and start transplanting them so that they can start growing in our new immersed aquarium plant setup. In terms of species, the tub in the background is mostly Crypt Petchii, but there are some Anubias plants that are found under the crypts as well. And the tub in the front is mostly Crypt Wendetii, but again, there are some Anubias plants underneath, as well as some Hydrocotyle japonica in the foreground as well. But the majority of the Anubias plants I am going to go through and try and propagate them so that we can start to see how they do in our immersed setup. And of course, if you want to see exactly how I propagate my Anubias plants, I have a video on my channel where I go over that in quite a lot of detail, so I'll link that as well so you can check that out. Alright everyone, so a little bit of an update. I've gone through the tubs and I've removed all of the Anubias plants. I've taken the time to remove the soil from the roots and trim the roots a little bit, but I have not yet gone through and propagated any of these plants. As you can see, some of them are pretty healthy, some of them are showing some signs of deficiencies and some browning on the leaves, so I'm looking forward to getting them in a better setup. So hopefully they can grow a little bit more. Another thing that I'm just realizing as I'm seeing all of these plants laid out here is I didn't expect as many Anubias plants as we actually have. So I think I might just do this experiment with Anubias, and I'll keep my crypts for another day, and I'll transplant them into the new immersed setup another time. And it'll be interesting to run the experiment with just the Anubias species and see exactly what kind of setup grows these plants the best. As we all know, Anubias is quite a slow grower, so it'll be awesome to figure out, what kind of setup grows these the fastest. Alright, so I've gone through and I've propagated my Anubias plants. As you can see here, this isn't all of them, but it's a handful. I've kind of separated them from very, very small plants to more mature plants just to help with the planting process. I could do a mixture of both and just make sure that the smaller plants aren't getting shaded out by the larger plants. At the top of the screen here, you can see a few different containers that I've already gone through and planted some of the Anubias plants. I do find this larger gravel is a little bit more difficult to plant in compared to obviously soil or even smaller gravel would be. But one of the nice things is that I left a lot of the roots still on the Anubias plants, so that does help get the roots down into the gravel, which will help anchor the plants temporarily until the plant can actually attach itself onto the gravel. So as an example, I like to use tweezers to kind of nestle the plant into the gravel, and then I'll use my fingers to kind of push some of the gravel over top of the plant to keep it in place. It is important to note that for planting Anubias, it's not ideal to cover the rhizome. That could lead to the rhizome actually rotting, and the plant can actually die from that. So as I'm trying to plant some of these plants, it'll be important to leave the rhizome above the gravel and just make sure that the roots is the only thing that's being buried by the gravel. Alright everyone, and here we have it. All of the Anubias plants have been added to the different planters. I've gone through and tried to space them out as evenly as possible, and also in order to keep the experiment as fair as possible, I tried to have a mix of mature plants and young plants for both of the different treatments. On the left hand side over here we have the soil mixed with the gravel, and on the right hand side over here we have just the gravel. And you'll notice here we have one tub that has just soil in it, and just like any good experiment, we're going to have a control to go along with these two. So this actually does not have any holes drilled into the bottom of it, and instead I'm just going to add the lid, and it's going to act as our old-fashioned or traditional immersed aquarium plant setup. And I'm going to have this sit on the rack so that it gets exposed to the same amount of light. So we'll see over time how the plants in the soil control do in comparison to both the gravel and the soil and gravel treatment. Alright, and there we have it. All of the tubs that have all of our Anubias plants have been put into the 3 different tiers here. I have all of the containers labeled so we know which one is soil and gravel versus gravel. And as you can see right here, I have the control immersed tub so that we can compare to the more traditional methods to growing immersed plants. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn on the pump, and we're actually going to let this system run through the ebb and flow cycle. I'm hoping that all the plants do okay. I kind of have a feeling that some of the plants are going to be uprooted when the water level rises, so we might have to replant some of those Anubias plants that pop out of the gravel. But for the most part, I'm feeling pretty optimistic, and I think these plants are going to do really well in this setup. So as you can see, guys, a little bit of soil is coming up in the water column, but it's not actually as cloudy as I was expecting, so I think that's a pretty good sign. Alright, so I turned the pump on and everything ran pretty smoothly for the most part. The main thing that I noticed was how cloudy the water got, and that actually was from the soil in the tubs that was being kicked up and suspended into the water. I kind of had a feeling this was going to happen. The water from the second level, when it rushes into this level here, it's quite fast, and when the bin was filling up, it kicked up a lot of that soil. So I think if I do a few water changes, I should be able to get that cloudiness away. And I think once the system runs, it kind of finds its own equilibrium. The soil is not always going to be kicked up into the water column. That being said, things did get pretty cloudy, so I'm hoping that through doing this experiment, we can find out whether or not soil is really a make it or break it. And hopefully down the road, we can either use just straight up gravel or another media that doesn't result in cloudiness like this. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment if you have any predictions on what kind of media or if this setup is even going to work to grow these plants. And also, I'm open to any suggestions you might have in order to improve this setup. I already right now have a few things in mind that I think we might do down the road, but I want to let this experiment run its course and make that decision based on these results. So if you want to see some updates on how these plants are growing, please subscribe to my channel. And until next time, take care.